Other than that, I am going to go ahead and introduce Jason. So he is a Fargo native and works for H2M as the senior creative strategist. And he's going to be talking about branding. And I'm not going to take up a lot of time talking about everything because I'm going to go ahead and let him speak for himself. So Jason, you can go ahead and start when you're ready.
Fantastic. Well, before I get going, I just want to take a minute and thank everyone for coming. We're all busy. It's lunchtime. A lot of us want to get away, and choosing to spend time hearing me talk means the world. So, thank you for coming and listening today. As Carrie mentioned, we don't have a huge group, so go ahead and ask questions. I'm an open book, um, and thanks again. So, oh, come on. There we go. Well, so this is just like when you go into the airport and they double check your face. So this is I made this presentation on the same different shirt, same idea. Tell you a little bit about my background and how I got started in this whole thing of branding. The year was 2000. So if you can, I tried to recreate me with hair and a puka shell necklace like I would have been wearing. But the year was 2000. I'm at Fargo South, and I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life, and so I went into a lecture about the world of advertising, which I'm like, okay, creative, and I get health insurance. That sounds reasonable. And a man by the name of Jory Adams, who I've never seen again, but I held onto his business card for a decade, slams a can of Coca-Cola Classic on the table, and he goes, what does this can make you think of? And people started saying things like, family picnics, summertime, polar bears, Santa Claus, fun, happy. And he goes, you're all right. But all of those things that you just mentioned are intended to sell a sweet brown liquid. And that moment, everything clicked. Like what we do in branding is to try to create associations, positive associations around our products and services in order to move the needle and ultimately sell them. And I said, yep, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. And for the past 20 years, whether through study or actually in my working life, that's what I've been trying to do. Is not only create these associations, but also create the symbols of brands. And so that's the main, if you take nothing else away from this talk today, it's this, right? Your logo is not your brand. Your logo is a symbol of all of the associations, positive or negative, people have with your brand. So according to a Forrester study in 2019, it takes 17 positive experiences to counteract one negative one. And so the idea of branding is how do we create these experiences so that when people see the symbol, they have that positive affinity towards your brand and ultimately your organization. And I think it's true, when we're talking about products, but the same thing applies in storytelling. The two are inextricably linked, whether we're telling fictional stories, we're telling brand stories. You think about Batman, I can go to any 5-year-old in the country and say, show them the Batman signal and say, okay, tell me about Batman. Well, he wears black, he has a cool car, and he beats bad guys doing karate. And they'd be right. And now Batman's been around since 1936, 38. He's the second oldest superhero that's still around today. And you think about so you think about the thousands of artists that have worked or touched on this iconic character, all collaborating and making that brand story. But when it comes to the symbol, they know who Batman is. And I say all of that because I know we're going to talk about everything else I'm going to talk about today is pretty much around how to build a symbol. but I wanted to start with the idea of associations, so that, we realize that as we evolve symbols, and it's okay for symbols to change so long as the associations with that change more slowly. So if you look at, from 1940 to today, the Batman symbol has gone through a whole host of evolutionary changes, but you could, from 1940 to today, you could ask anyone and he still wears black and he still drives a cool car and he still beats up bad guys doing karate. All right. So what does that really mean in terms of role? And that's where my role comes in as a creative strategist. So the creative side is what people see, what they experience, and the strategy is the brand, the background, figuring out how that business wants to be seen and be portrayed so that, the associations and symbols match. So evolving a brand, how do we actually do this in practice? And I'm going to walk through 3 different scenarios of work that H2M's done in the last calendar year to sort of illustrate the creation of symbols and associations. So here's the easy way. When people are already super enamored with the brand, the affinity, the equity is high. This is the easy way to do it. So we'll start with Zorbas. For those of you maybe, especially on the western half of the state, Zorbas is a Mexican and pizza restaurant and bar in Lakes Country, Minnesota. 13 locations, highly revered. Last year they came to us and said, we've had the same look and feel for about a decade. We want to change it up. And we go, okay, great. So maybe some new design aesthetics, some new creative. They're like, no, nothing is sacred. New logo, new everything. And at first we were kind of like, well, that's a big leap. But then the more we went into it, we're like, well, what else is going to change? The experience of the customer experience when they go into that establishment is not going to change. It's still going to be a party. It's still going to be a good time. The food isn't going to change dramatically. The process of ordering at the bar, they don't have waiters or servers. That's not going to change. And as we toured all 11 locations last winter, 2 of them closed in the summer. 2 have closed for 2 of the 13 close in the winter. So as we toured the 11 that were still open, we realized that restaurant is a time capsule. There's stuff there's locations that have like the Space Jam poster in it from the early 90s. Like it's this time capsule. It's an eclectic place. So we said, okay, well, those associations things, those things aren't gonna change. So we can drastically change the symbol, which we did. So we had the shield and the primary colors. We went to a softer primary palette, still keeping similar typography. Not similar, and then just cutting the tagline because it's 2020, 2021.
Hey, Jason.
Yeah.
I just wanted to make sure, some people are wondering if you've changed your presentation at all, or if it's just the title slide still.
Oh yeah, I'm on slide like 5.
Oh, okay.
So we're not.
It is not showing up, so I don't know if maybe you could stop presenting and then
I'm
try.
gonna stop. Oh my gosh, you guys, I'm so sorry.
No, I'm
Thank you
glad that
for-
somebody brought it up. I just thought maybe you were still giving a.
No, here, let me get out of this for a second. Well, here's what we're gonna do. I'll share my screen. Okay, so I'll stop. We're behind the curtain. It's not a PowerPoint, it's a PDF. Okay. So when I change, can you see this?
Yep, I just saw it change right now. Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
So we'll just and then we'll fast forward. Hi, welcome. This is my face. This is my face. So they match. This is my story. This is me with an artist recreation of what I looked like possibly at 16. Coke can story. Bat signal. Logo is a symbol. Your brand is the associations people make about you. So your job is to try to influence those associations so that when they see the symbol, they draw those correlations. A lot of people have worked on Batman over the years. He's great. But sometimes his symbol changes. And that's okay as long as the associations change more slowly. Okay. What do I do? Creative is what people see. Strategy is the process of planning how we want brands to be seen. Evolving a brand, easy way, equity's high, Zorbas. Okay, previously on this presentation that's still going on. So that's what we changed. So we had, Zorbas on the lake, again, really rich, primary color palette. We softened it up a little bit, bring it into more of a modern state. As far as the actual creative output, what they were doing before, a lot of wood grains, it was very like 90s extreme, where it's just how many different textures can we put into a single Photoshop file. And we said, let's scale it back a little bit. We'll still keep some of the headlines that they like, which is kind of funny, irreverent, timely. And so far it's been really, really well received. And when you walk into the building, it doesn't feel any different because, again, that place is a time capsule. So here's the really complex way to come to a refreshed brand, and it's what we did at H2M. Within the last 2 years, there's been a lot of changes that we've made in terms of onboarding services, bringing social info, full-time social team, full-time video team, our approach being more full-time digital capabilities, just all of those things that we've absorbed. It was time to reintroduce ourselves into the market and get rid of some things. But because not a lot of people know about H2M with relative to this industry, we didn't want to drastically change our logo, because we're trying to instead focus on some of those other associations. So the process started by getting some input, building that out into archetypes, figuring out what we want our associations to be, making statements that reflect that, and then rolling out some stylescapes, and then ultimately into design. So the input process is, instead of trying to manufacture a brand, we wanted to do this more authentically. And so what we did is we created a survey for the entire team that was here. And we asked them 3 simple questions, from who are we, who aren't we, and who do we want to be? And asked the team to come up with 10 attributes for both positive and negative. So who are we? We might be stale. That's fine. Just be honest. And then what we do is when we look at who we want to be, we say, okay, where's the number of mentions? Like how many people say we want to be this? And we just look at those attributes and then do some wizardry behind the scenes, and they all align with what are called brand archetypes. So I'll give you a little bit of background on brand archetyping. For some of you that know it, you're going to be like, this is an oversimplification. For some people who've never heard about brand archetypes, you're like, what? This makes what? But the origin of brand archetypes starts with, in the 60s, Joseph Campbell, who's cultural anthropologist, and Carl Jung, who's a psychologist. They were both thinking about stories and how human beings are, wired either through culture or just through, brain makeup. And stories they found that in every story ever told ever, there are a number of archetypes. And then flash forward to the year 2000, and two authors said, well, if stories can connect people with similar characters, why can't that apply to brands? Because again, they're inextricably linked. The associations we do with Batman are no different than the associations that Coca-Cola is trying to do. And what they've realized is that there are 4 parent categories of what these characters or what these brands try to accomplish. It's either how to help people find themselves and find their own individuality, or on the other side, how they help people, customers, belong. And then on the y-axis, it's people who are in search of stability or and comfort, or people who are trying to achieve, master some sort of skill. And then within those 4 basic quadrants, there are sort of 3 character archetypes that are trying to achieve that. So trying to master something, right? You would have the hero, which is just going to come up with a plan, take action, and go. The magician accomplishes it. Outwardly, you don't know, but behind the scenes, they did a bunch of stuff. But poof, they accomplish it magically. And then, rebel brands like Harley-Davidson, they're gonna find their own independence, but they're gonna do it their own way and buck trends and all of that. And after we synthesized the data from the survey, it really came to pass that where H2M wanted to go was to be a rebel brand. There's a lot of, within the advertising agency space in Fargo-Moorhead, as well as in the rest of North Dakota, just due to the nature of primary businesses like healthcare, finance, ag. I mean, those are all pretty safe brands or pretty safe industries in terms of taking big marketing risks. And so there was an opportunity for us to say, okay, well, the big agencies, the big firms, they have to play it safe because their primary income comes from ag, healthcare, or finance. We don't have to play that way. We can be the alternative. We can be different. We can be rebellious. And that's what we chose. So now that we knew sort of our attitude, what do we want people to feel when they interact with an H2M material, when they interact with us as people, right? Come as they are, be refreshing, spark curiosity, smart, direct, evocative. Like, it's not just about being louder, it's about being louder with something to say that may even, contradict what the norms have been for the last, 50, 60 years, pre-digital. So that's kind of where we came up with these statements, right? Like, this is some of our rallying cries, like, break the rules to see what's important. When I was in college, if you were to write a radio commercial, you had to say the name 3 times, and you had to say the phone number at least twice, and that's how you wrote radio. Well, if people like you, they'll Google you. So we have to figure out what's really important to communicate our message, and then test that to see, if our assumptions were correct or incorrect, and then adapt accordingly. Connect like the pack animals we are. We're all human. I mean, if the pandemic said anything, it's that we have a need to get out and to connect, and to just, even if it's on screens, we're pack animals. So practice radical audience empathy and think about the individuals you're trying to talk to. Acknowledge that people don't like advertising, and why. Why was in the 90s, for every rom-com in the 90s, the lead protagonist worked in advertising, right? Like, what women want, how to lose a guy in 10 days or 30 days, whatever, Matthew McConaughey vehicle. Advertising was a sexy thing. And somehow in the last 25 years, it's become, a bad word. advertising has become a bad word to the point where we don't even call it advertising anymore. We call it marketing. We don't call it creative. We call it content. So we as communicators need to recognize that something happened in the last 2 or 3 decades, and what can we do to fix it? And lastly, just helping brands celebrate who they are without apologies. A lot of institutions want to play it safe, right? They don't just say, hey, we do concrete, we do driveway solutions. Like why? No one talks like that. I don't go to McDonald's for a hunger solution. I go to McDonald's for a cheeseburger. Like, acknowledge who you are and celebrate it. Be proud of what you do. And you don't have to make it sexier than it is, just make it honest. And so we had these statements, these associations that we wanted people to make with our brand. And then we had to put it into visuals. And because we were being rebellious, we kind of went down 2 paths, but there's a dirty word on the next slide. So if you're sensitive, you've been warned. So the top version, was one way we were looking at trying to be bold and different, and it felt too chic. We're on the bottom, brighter colors, messier fonts, weird animals, stronger language. The idea that you don't have to be you have to be likable. That doesn't mean you have to be nice. Is some of the things that we just that felt edgier. And so that's the direction that we went. Because we were doing something bold like this on the bottom, we didn't want to change our logo too much at the top. We tweaked ever so slightly the typography, and then really just cutting the tagline, because it's not just creativity at work for creativity's sake. It's about building associations with the plan and intent, and then layering on the creative so that people draw the right associations with the symbols of our clients. So if you look at the left, this is what we had for 15 years, and it looks that way. If you look on the right, it's louder and bolder, and I would argue different than what you're going to see from a lot of organizations in the state and the region. And that's right or wrong, that's the space we want to play in. So that's the long, complicated way. Here's probably the most common way to do a rebrand or a refresh of a symbol. We're going to talk about Lakeside Tavern. So Lakeside Tavern is in DL, Detroit Lakes, I should say. And they've been around since 1891. They had changed ownership as of January of last year, which, had they known, probably not the best time to buy a restaurant business. But anyway, sale happened. And this is kind of what we had to work with. When you first walked into the restaurant, there was taxidermy everywhere. Nothing was really cohesive. And when it came time to zhuzh it up a little bit and say that, ownership has changed, things are going to change. A lot of the experiences a lot of the things you like are going to stay, but some of the things that aren't really appetizing, like taxidermy, they're probably going to go. So our challenge was, okay, well, we don't have any standards to work with, really. What do we do? And the team, we started looking at this fella, the mustachio gentleman, and we said, okay, this is where we're going to start. We're going to have to make meaning. And so we're like, okay, well, it was a bar. It was in the 1890s. Like, what would a tavern be like? So when we started thinking, like, okay, well, this is a tavern is a place where, the stories and the fish stories get bigger and bigger and grander the more rounds people have. And so who would be at that place? Well, Gaston would absolutely, make that his watering hole where he talks about how great he was. He can still acknowledge, the Huntsman things, even though we took it off the walls. And then it would be just played to comedic effect. Like the one statement here that is by far my favorite is, being allergic to whiskey because it makes their knuckles bleed. And so how do we create this character that we can then leverage throughout other communication materials, so people start associating comedic bravado with that Lakeside Tavern symbol. And this is what we came up with. So we kept we evolved our mustachio dude, kept sort of the feel of the typography from the Lakeside part of it, just modernizing it, but in a way harkening back to old-timey signage, and ultimately just cleaned it up. So when you compare it side by side, what we had on the left here, 20 plus colors, 6 fonts, 3 logos, a Sasquatch. I didn't like. There's no story there. I'm, or if there is a story, it's really going to be hard to explain Mustachio Dude and Sasquatch, and too much. So we simplified it. And on the right, you see something that's going to be much easier to talk about going forward, because they are a brewery. And so they've in the last calendar year, they've brewed 15 originals, and now we can put a story behind each of those beer names. We can create the most interesting man in the world. Now that campaign's retired, but we can resurrect that and apply it to Lakeside. So the question often comes up, do we rebrand, or do we just clean it up a little bit? And I more often than not will argue against a total rebrand. So scenarios where I would say, yes, you should name change, drastically update your logo, all of that would be if you have a major new offering or operation, a merger or acquisition. You've seen this with Bell Bank. It wasn't originally Bell Bank, it was State Bank and Trust, and then it was Bell Bank and Trust, and now it's Bell Bank. Adapting to customer slang. Think about Midco, think about KFC. That's how people were, those are the associations that customers made, and so the brand just said, okay, that's the nickname you gave me, we'll take it. I've also seen this recently, I won't mention which brand, but they have a poor reputation, and they just changed the name because they think that's going to solve the problem. Well, if the inner workings of your organization aren't changing, then you're just going to have to change the name again and eat that expense in the next decade or less. I'm much more a fan of brand refreshes. So when I would do that, adjustments to the offer or operations, slight changes. If you're adding on a service, for example, that might be a good time to include that maybe in the name, or just refresh the look to sort of accommodate and house that new change or add on. You want to change how you're perceived, so hence the H2M refresh we went through. Dated, right? Like you have a logo that's just old and not timeless. I think about like a 3M logo. Well, that's timeless, but others are not. And you want to expand, right? So you're growing, and that growth is offering more add-on services, so you can leverage your brand equity, but still enter a new market, saying, hey, this is who we are, and this is how we look. Finally, so I've talked about symbols and I've talked about associations, but those associations aren't just creative, right? If we go back to that Forrester example of you need 17 positive experiences to counteract one negative one, use your utility belt. Yep, I'm back to Batman. How you handle reviews, how customer service is handled. We as communicators, we can have an influence on all of that. Publicity stunts, right? What are the experiences that you can create that people are going to share on social media? That's becoming more and more important as Apple and Facebook are battling over privacy. The ability to target your digital advertising isn't going to work the same in the next 5 years. So start thinking now about what we can do to have positive associations that people will share on our behalf. company culture, we like to think about marketing as just communicating to potential customers, but we live in an era where everyone's got a publishing device in their pocket, and so making sure that our employees are having the same positive associations with the work as customers are is really important, because they'll advocate for you. Loyalty program, social engagement, those sorts of things. So lastly, I know I ran through this in about a half hour, but I can geek out super hard. And reach out, email me at jason@h2m.biz. Yes, it's .biz because we've been around before 2005. Or you can call me 701-373-1279, or preferably text because it's 2021. That's what I've got today. Can I open this up to questions from the group? Open book.
And I do believe that I allowed everyone to unmute their mic. If I didn't, please shoot me a message if you have a question and you're not able to talk.
How long did it take you to come up with the H2M long process?
That process, just to come up with how we were going to do it, or actually
How long did the entire process take?
It took about 3 months.
Okay.
When I've done it with other clients, it can take longer. It just depends on the size of the committee. If I were to do this for an organization, instead of giving everybody this survey data, I would have a meeting or a workshop with a really good cross section of that organization. So give me some leaders, and we'll do maybe a half day with just a leadership group, and then give me a half day with someone who's been there the longest, a new hire, different departments, and do a second. And then instead of just having them circle this stuff, let's go back to it. Instead of having them circle it, what I do is I actually have stack of 144 cards that I lay out on the table, and then I have we narrow that who we are, who we aren't, who we want to be list down. And in that process, what I'm doing is I have another individual at least who's walking around and just listening and taking notes, because it's the debate between we're this versus this that often is going to produce some really good insights that you can use later when you're coming up with sort of those statements and things. So we elected to go this way because I didn't want to. I was relatively new to H2M. I've only been here since May of 19. So I didn't want to come in and have a bunch of closed door conversations with a fairly small team, and the optics weren't right. So we did it a little bit differently than I would normally do for a larger organization, and or I have done for larger organizations. So that's sort of my inside baseball there.
Is it ever intimidating to talk about these feelings and adjectives describing words with heads of big companies?
No, and it's funny. I was working with a utility, and we had some of their executives, and when they have a safe space, they're going to be honest, and they're going to be like, well, yeah, your department might be this, but if you think about that department, no, they are slow and they are sluggish. They are, and it's, what I like about it, and the reason why I don't find it intimidating is because what we're trying to do is find authenticity. We're trying to find like their essence, like their secret sauce, right? And it's really just how you handle the room,
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
I find sometimes like conference rooms like that, even you step up to that level, there's a big unique table that's you're not even supposed to like touch because it's so fancy, and it can be intimidating to come into, and then to talk about this kind of stuff is hard.
So what I would do, what I've done in the past too is, first thing I do is I call it a workshop, so that
Okay.
that they're coming to my workshop, right? So that way you're dealing with some dynamics there. Second thing I do is I'll oftentimes have it offsite, so that I'm not going to their big conference room. Like they're coming to, we'll go to a private room at a restaurant, or they'll come to like my offices, and we'll sort of map out that whole experience. And then, by having them physically do things with cards and posting them, like that gets them up and moving, so they're not sort of in their security rigid, executive chairs. So those are just some other tips that when you have to have, to help make it easier to have conversations with people, with really high ranking officials.
Thank you.
Jason, when you go through this process with an organization, like say refreshing a brand or whatever, do you have, how do you know if the process worked? If the things that you put in place or the company puts in place, do you have means of measuring the difference before and after kind of thing?
There are some ways. Social listening is a good tool. You can create, depending on the social listening tool you use, it'll monitor keywords, and then it'll also monitor affinity, which just means how many positive things people are saying about you as it crawls. So you can always do a before and after on that. You can see, sort of employee adoption would be another thing you could look at, right? So if part of your rollout is giving everybody a bunch of new swag with your refreshed look on it, how many people are wearing it to the office, right? There's not a lot of hard data you're going to pull. I will say that, don't look at the first 6 months of change as an indicator of success or failure, because humans, we hate to change. We hate it. And so there's going to be, because it's different, there's going to be some blowback initially. I mean, like if you remember when Pepsi changed its logo all those years ago, and there was just like chaos and outrage, but now like no one even goes, oh man, I sure wish I could go back to the old Pepsi look. Change over time.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Jason, a couple times you mentioned radical empathy. Can you get into that a little bit more?
Yeah. So when I talk about radical audience empathy, oftentimes when I'm working with clients, it's always about, I want to do this tactic, and I'm going to try to, I'm going to target that audience, right? I'm going to make an impression. I'm going to get, and it's always like kind of finger pointing, right? And it's like, look at it from the audience's, look at it from the customer's point of view. Like, in the context that they're going to consume this content, what are they thinking? What are they feeling? What are they hearing? What do they need? What do you want them to know? What do you want them to think? What do you want them to do? Like, it's just, if I were to receive whatever tactic or communication as a consumer, would I be annoyed? Would I be creeped out? Would I be, the whole tactic? So I'll give you an example. As a marketer, I have the ability to tap into data that when someone says, I want a hot dog on their phone, I can put up ads for my hot dog store on Facebook based on what they used in their microphone, right? We've seen those ads. I think everyone who has a Facebook account has said something and then seen an ad for it. And that is creepy. Like, that is so invasive and creepy. And like, as a consumer, I don't like it. It doesn't make me feel good. So yes, as a marketer, I have the ability to do it, but we have to think about the audience and saying, okay, just because I can doesn't mean we should. And let's think through that at every single touch point within our customer journey, or, from when they are aware about our organization to, when they buy, to when we follow up with loyalty support. every step along the way, what do we want them to know? How do we want them to feel? What do we want them to do? What are they thinking? What are they feeling? What are they doing? And try to bridge that gap in a place of empathy and respect. It's hard to do because we have the pressure to generate revenue. But branding is all about the long game. I mean, if we all wanted short-term wins, we just go make coupons.
Also, I wonder, can you talk a little bit more about customer experience opportunities beyond coming into the place of business? I think you had talked about, I don't know if it was giveaways or, as privacy is changing, sort of the wave of the future with social media. Oh, publicity stunts. That's what it was.
And I mean, that's such a dirty, I put it up there because it's kind of a naughty term. I have said it, but I will tell you, so I'll tell you a story. I was at a bar downtown where our offices are located, and the Budweiser Clydesdales were walking down 4th Street, and people got up and were taking photos of it and sharing it and texting it and posting it, right? I haven't seen that kind of participation in a brand experience in a really, really long time. I certainly haven't seen it from a TV commercial or a radio spot, right? So that's what I'm talking about. Experiences that can be shared. Like we've seen videos on YouTube. People make an entire living just unboxing things. Like that is a niche on YouTube. So that there again is an example of a positive customer experience. I'm a big Apple user because I'm a cliche in this industry, but unboxing an Apple product like an iPhone or even their AirPods, the feel of the box, the way everything is so seamless and smooth, and that's an association with Apple trying to be sleek and hip and cool and sexy, right? So that's something that could be shareable. If you're running a loyalty program and you just give a random customer some sort of gift just for being a customer, that's going to make them feel good. And there's a chance they're going to share it. And if it there's data out there that if an advertising message is going to be received more poorly than a friend or a colleague or someone sharing it on their social, people are just going to buy into someone else's endorsement versus just an advertising message. So what can we do at every step, from when someone's getting aware of us, to searching for us, to interacting with us online or offline, to actually making the sale, to the follow-up? What can we do to influence and delight along the way? And that's the experiences that I'm talking about. Did that answer your question?
Yes, I'm writing this stuff down. That was great.
Well, listen, and you can write it down, or you can email me at jason@h2.is, and I can email it back for you.
It's okay. I'm a writer. I'm a note taker, so it's all
good. Good. I'm a writer, but I'm a slow writer. And yeah. Anyway.
Do you ever have situations where a client explains their brand or their archetypes, but then pitches you make that you think might fit, they tell you they don't? Do you know what I'm saying? Does that make sense?
Yeah. All the time.
So what do you do, or how do you handle that?
So that's where, what I like about that workshopping process is that it's not my observation of them, it's what they told me and how we've synthesized that. So you can always, even when I'm just pitching creative in general, it's always based on something concrete. So it's like you're showing your work. Just like I never thought I would have to do that in math class as a kid. Like I didn't think it was valuable to show your work. oh my gosh, as a professional, yes, show your work. So that way you can, so they don't like execution, they don't like the end product. Okay, well, was this strategic point still right? No. Oh, well, was this correct? Yes. Okay, so the breakdown happened in the middle. And that just tries to absolve like subjective criticism. Like, I don't like it. Well, okay, but does it satisfy all of the things that we talked about in our strategy? I have had that after an archetyping process where someone's been like, how did you come to that? Like, well, this. And it ended up just being the individual not liking the result. One brand I worked with, you know, they had a ruler archetype as their, you know, was their driver, right? That's just their industry. And, you know, when it came down to their voice being masculine or feminine, I said, this is a masculine brand. And people on the marketing team, a team of all women, were really up in arms about that. And I said, listen, if it was a hospital, it would be a feminine brand. Like, but this is who you are. Like, this is it based on what we just talked about. And so that's caused some issues. But yeah, I think it's going to be situational. I just think you try to show your work, you try to use, you know, the input they gave as your justifications whenever you can. And ultimately take your lumps if you have to.
When you're going through like a brand refresh or a rebrand, how many different like versions of things do you bring to the table? Do you bring like a package of like what you really think it should be and try and steer them to that? Or do you bring multiple things and are okay with what they choose no matter what?
Yeah, so I've done it a bunch of different ways, and the stylescapes thing that we did for H2M was the first time we had really tried it. So we tried it on ourselves. This helped a ton. Because, you know, outside of like putting the logo in here, we could take that off. But we've gone from, okay, we have kind of these statements, right? And so we could get that approved from the client. Like, yes, these statements reflect kind of who we are. And then we gave, you know, 2 distinct options, and it's not, and you go into it saying, this is not your logo. These are not ads. What feels like you? Where do you kind of lean and why? And so it's almost like, you know, when you build a house, right? And they give, or you remodel a room, and they say, okay, well, here's the swatches that I'm thinking for color. Here's the textures that I'm thinking. Here's the da-da-da-da-da. And if you can land that, then it's so much easier to get the other stuff approved. Because it's like, oh, because then you can be like, listen, I said we were going to do tile. They can't be like, I wanted wood. Like, no, you said you wanted tile. We talked about this. So this intermediary process, way better than just like a straight up mood board. Way better than, you know, just a giant reveal like a ta-da. That's another thing I think. Well, I've made this mistake several times throughout my career is the big reveal. It's better to be iterative. I mean, yeah, sometimes it can go overboard when there's a committee and they're all making, you know, justifying their own existence throughout the process. But you're going to have, you're building on, you're getting things approved along the way. You're showing your work. So when the final reveal comes, it might not be as, you know, mind blowing. Like, they're not going to jump up and pat you on the back like you're hoping for, but at least it's going to be good. And there's not going to be, you know, 45 rounds of revisions.
Jason, what do you think about mini branding within a big brand? If you're a company that has an overall brand and then you have departments within the company that want to sort of stand out a little bit.
Sure. Can you give me an example?
So I work for Bell Bank.
Okay.
And we have an overall Bell Bank brand. And then we have different departments such as wealth management, insurance, checking and savings. So we call that retail, but not externally. And then, did I say insurance? Oh, mortgage. So we have just these little unique niches within each department. And we're thinking about doing some maybe colors specific to each team that's would be more like our secondary colors, where it still ties in with the main brand, but they have their own sort of mini brand as well.
Yeah, so now we're looking at brand architecture. And typically, so what you're looking at, so brand architecture, what you're talking about is what's called a branded house. So when you think about brands that use their parent name and then another service, so think an example would be like FedEx Air, FedEx Ground, FedEx Fleet. And so in that situation, what you're trying to do is lift up a particular service by leveraging the brand equity of, in this case, Bell. So Bell Mortgage, Bell Trust, Bell Insurance. I don't have a strong opinion one way or the other. I think as long as whatever you do doesn't dilute the parent brand, you should be fine. So like, I wouldn't recommend, for example, having Bell Mortgage be secondary green and Bell Insurance being, secondary blue, because you're diluting the Bell part of the name, right? If you had, so maybe if you're thinking about changing the color to the individual services, that might be okay. And Bell is one of those. I was lucky enough to work with to do actually some of this archetyping work with Karen over there and Jody Heilman when she was still there. Yeah, and where was it? I'm just sorry, I just went down memory lane. No, so Bell, I do think, has that equity, right? Especially locally, where they can make probably more radical changes without affecting them, and we've seen it. It's crazy that they purchased Bell Mortgage, but we're humble enough to be like, nah, Bell's stronger than State, so we're gonna change our whole name, and our customers will come along with us for the ride, and they did. So I think, in your scenario, again, my recommendation is maybe change the color of the business unit, but you probably can't go wrong, honestly. Like, your customers are so loyal in this area. Go nuts.
And that is really what it is, just looking for more consistency across what we do and tying some of our services in with the brand. So we wouldn't change logo colors or anything like that. It's just more, I think, backgrounds for those specific ads or pieces or whatever it might be.
Yeah, and as long, when it comes into ads, I would say as long as you can keep, the overall feeling consistent. So when I look at it, even though I'm talking about mortgage, when I'm looking at it, I still think Bell.
Okay,
That's
great. Thank you.
Yeah, and you can tell Sean I said that.
I will.
He used to be I worked at Sundog for a number of years, and he was my boss there for a number of them. So.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Well, we are 5 minutes from our meeting being over, and I don't know when I do a webinar if it's just going to cut off. So I think maybe I'm still not figuring out Zoom. Like I said, I use Teams at work, so I know that, but Zoom I'm very rusty on. So I think we'll probably wrap up here. And Jason, if you want to put maybe your slide back up again at the end there.
Oh, my shameless plug slide?
Yeah. So if you have other questions, it seems like you're pretty open to having conversations or virtual coffees or things like that.
Whatever. I really like this stuff. I said before, this industry has I want to change my industry's reputation back to where it was in the Mad Men era or the 90s, right? And we only do that by working together and trying to create, authentic communications that help people make business decisions or purchasing decisions. So please reach out. I'm full of opinions and they're free.
Isn't that a typical marketer?
The free or the opinions?
But a little bit of both. So communicators and marketers, yes.
For sure.
Yeah, that's it for our presentation today. I appreciate everybody for sticking with us and asking questions. And thank you so much, Jason, for presenting to us. This was a really great topic to hear about and look at brand refreshes or rebranding. So
anytime. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
yep, thank you.
Take care.
All right, everybody have a good day. Thanks.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.